Welcome to the on-record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Courtney Ridenhour, and I'm joined today by Emergency Management Coordinator Robert Foresman. Mr. Foresman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your role as Emergency Coordinator?
In the role, I am responsible for doing all the emergency preparedness for the county. We have an emergency operations plan that has to be updated every 4 years. And it's a regional plan that includes the City of Lexington, City of Buena Vista. I'm also responsible for preparing for any man-made or natural disasters that occur, also responsible for the management of the highway response program, where we want to ensure that we keep the traffic flowing, also responsible for the hazardous materials program within the county, and within that coordinate with the hospital and the fire and rescue agencies, and I serve as the point of contact for all fire and rescue agencies in the county.
The emergency communication system is going through an overhaul. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Back in 2002, after 9/11, the federal government mandated that all localities would have to become narrowband compliant, which essentially meant that they were all operating on a 25 megahertz scale, and now they're going to cut it back to 12.5. And with that, we had to make sure that all of our radio equipment that we have in the field was compliant as we were purchasing, so that it could be reprogrammed. And currently, the dispatch center has had to purchase some additional equipment, and also they're making the necessary internal changes so that by October 1 of next year, that we'll be ready to go narrowband compliant, because it has to be completed by January 1 of 2013.
What was the reasoning for switching from the wideband to the narrowband?
Well, there has been an increase in the number of users of the radio system, whether it's commercial users or private users using radio systems, and they wanted to ensure that the public safety agencies had enough radio frequencies to continue to perform their job.
Who all is using the communication system right now?
Right now we have fire and rescue that are using it. Law enforcement uses it, and those are the only ones currently. But the system that we have has been in place for, well, since 1981, and it's been at its current location since 1997.
And have those agencies and units run into any issues with the communication system as it stands now?
Yes, with that system, we have a lot of dead spots within the county. And when I refer to dead spots, we're talking about places where they cannot communicate with the dispatch center. On their portable or their handheld radios, they have to try to do it out of their vehicles. And it's not always good when it's in the vehicles. There are a limited number of channels that we have to operate on, and that makes it a challenge when you have multiple events taking place.
Can you give me a specific example of when that's occurred?
Well, one of the big examples was the snowstorm back in 2009, where we actually had the Emergency Operations Center opened in Lexington, and we had radio communication there, but we could not talk to first responders in Fairfield, and we were having problems talking to them in the Natural Bridge area.
Now, there have been two plans pitched for ways to overhaul the system, a $20 million option and then a $6.7 million option. Can you tell me a little bit about the positives and negatives of each?
Sure. The short-term fix, the $6.7 million, that was proposed to build some additional sites, 4 additional sites to what we already have in place. With that, those additional sites were going to provide us some additional coverage, but it was not going to meet the federal communication standards for public safety, which is 95%. And that system, the reason the localities did not want that was because they would still be paying for that system when we had to completely overhaul the system totally, and there was no guarantee that that equipment could be usable in the big project. Now with the big project, when they came in and conducted the conceptual design, they said we needed 28 tower sites in order to meet that 95% coverage. There is no way that this region can afford essentially having to build 22 additional sites. So we have talked about scrapping that idea and actually going with something in between that the area can afford. And what we want to look at using are the current tower sites that are in place, along with the fiber optic program that's getting ready to take place within the county.
Could you explain the 95-95 standard?
Right, that standard is that 95% of the time when you have a portable radio or a handheld radio, that 95% of the time when you're in the field, more specifically inside a building in the field, that when you push the button to talk, that you should be able to communicate 95% of the time within the dispatch center, and it should cover 95% of the area.
And are those recorded and measured through error reports or a system like that?
Right, you would have that measured through the quality of the radio system.
And we have 6 towers currently, and are those just spread throughout Rockbridge County in more populated areas, or?
Well, no, because when the 3 radio systems were merged together, we had to put the tower sites where it would be beneficial to the system at that point. Some of these systems had been in place from when the systems were individually used. So they're not really in populated places, they're in places where it's necessary to have communications.
And what 3 systems were merged?
The City of Lexington, City of Buena Vista, and Rockbridge County.
Okay. And where will funding for this overhaul come from?
Well, the 3 localities are going to have to figure out how to come up with the funding for that. There is very limited grant money. Most of the grant money that was available right after 9/11 has dried up. So the localities are going to have to look at it through local funds, which may mean an increase in taxes or some other method. And they're going to also have to look at some financing programs to pay this long term.
Have they looked into what specific taxes they would look to increase?
No, they haven't. It's just been a very general discussion at this point. Until we truly have the detailed design of the radio system and move forward, we won't know exactly how much it's going to cost.
Now, you mentioned grant money. Who is giving that grant? Federal?
Well, there is federal grant money and there is some state grant money, but with this mandate that everybody go to narrowband, most of that money has dried up.
Now, are there any supporters for the short-term op plan, and what has been their argument?
There has not been any support for that because it really did not make sense for any of us to spend that money and move forward and have to try to build that or continue to pay for it while we're building the new system.
Has anyone said we should just go ahead and go with the 20 million?
Well, I think people understand that we want to go with a system that's going to provide us that coverage. And I believe everybody agrees that we should do the, project to the best of our ability. But what they don't want to do is spend $28 million. So we need to look at how we can reduce the cost.
And what happens if we aren't in compliance by the January 1, 2013 deadline?
Well, the federal government, when they wrote the laws for this will be the first time where they can actually assess penalty payments to localities, and they could cut off the radio system.
So we would have no emergency communications system? So what's the next step in this?
The next step is we're waiting on the statement of work for the second phase of the program from the engineering company. Once we get that and find out what the exact cost will be, we'll go back to the 3 localities, ask them to provide the funding for the study, and then we'll start the design phase.
How long would the design phase take?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 9 months. And then what we would do is write the RFP, all of this within that time frame, and then we would be able to send it out to vendors and get their responses to find out exactly how much it's going to cost.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Foresman. Thanks for watching. For the Rockbridge Report, I'm Courtney Ridenhour.